My name is Lily. Listen carefully to my story. Do not miss any part because this story is very special. It will touch your heart, make you feel deep emotions, and in the end, you will understand something beautiful about life. It was a quiet morning. The sky was painted with soft shades of pink and orange. The sun was slowly rising, and the gentle wind was playing with the leaves. I was sitting on a bench in the park, lost in my thoughts. I was tired of the same routine, tired of the same worries, and tired of pretending to be okay. As I sat there, I saw someone walking toward me. It was you. You didn't say anything at first. You simply sat beside me. I turned my head slightly and looked at you. You smiled softly, as if you knew me forever. "Good morning," you said. Your voice was gentle, calm, and warm. I wasn't in the mood to talk, but your voice made me feel safe, so I replied softly, "Good morning." You looked at the flowers nearby. "Aren't they beautiful?" you asked. I nodded slowly, but said nothing. You glanced at me again and asked, "Do you like flowers?" I shrugged. "I used to." You tilted your head. "Used to?" I sighed and looked away. "Yeah, life is too busy now. I don't stop to look at flowers anymore." You were quiet for a moment. Then you gently said, "That's sad. Flowers are still here. You just forgot to look." Your words made me stop. They felt so simple, yet they were so true. I hadn't stopped to look at flowers, or at anything, really. I was always rushing, always worrying. I was alive, but not really living. You smiled kindly. "Do you want to take a walk with me?" I didn't know why, but I said yes. Maybe it was your gentle eyes or the calmness in your voice. I stood up and we started walking slowly through the park. As we walked, you noticed every little thing: the sound of the birds, the color of the sky, the tiny ants carrying food. You pointed at a butterfly and said, "Look at how free it is. It doesn't worry about yesterday or tomorrow, it just flies." I watched the butterfly and sighed. "I wish I could be that free," I whispered. You turned to me and asked, "Why can't you?" I stopped walking. Your question made my heart feel heavy, because I have too many problems, too many things to fix, too many mistakes. You looked at me with gentle eyes. "But who doesn't?" you asked softly. "We all have problems. We all make mistakes. That doesn't mean we stop living." I shook my head. "It's not that easy," I mumbled. You smiled again, softly, patiently. "I know, but maybe it's simpler than you think." We kept walking. After a while, we sat down on the grass, watching the sky. You took a small leaf from the ground and twirled it between your fingers. "You know," you began, "I once met someone who thought they couldn't be happy again. They believed they were too broken. But do you know what they did?" I shook my head. "What?" "They planted a tree," you said with a soft smile. "It was small at first, weak, but every day they watered it. Even when they were sad, they watered it. Even when they were tired, they watered it, and do you know what happened?" I glanced at you. "It grew?" You nodded. "Yes. And do you know what they realized?" I stared at you, waiting for the answer. "They realized they were growing too," you said quietly. "Without even noticing it, they became stronger, kinder, and happier." just like their tree. I felt something stir in my chest. It was a small warmth, a soft ache, as if my heart was waking up after being asleep for so long. You turned to me with gentle eyes. Maybe you are still growing too. You just can't see it yet. Your words filled my eyes with tears. I turned away slightly, embarrassed, but you simply smiled and looked at the sky. For the first time in a long time, I felt lighter. I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could breathe again. You stood up slowly and held out your hand. "Come on," you said. "Let me show you something." I took your hand and we walked further into the park. You led me to a small pond. The water was still, clear, and peaceful. You knelt down by the water's edge and said, "Look." I knelt beside you and looked into the water. I saw my reflection, my tired eyes, my sad face. You placed a smooth stone in my hand. "Now, drop this into the water." I did as you said. The stone made a small splash, and then gentle ripples spread across the water. "See that?" you said softly. "That's you. Every small thing you do, every smile, every kind word, it creates ripples. You may not always see it, but you are changing the world a little at a time, just like this stone." I stared at the water, watching the ripples slowly fade. Something inside me cracked open, something I had been holding in for so long. The pain, the sadness, the tiredness, it all came rushing out. I covered my face with my hands, and to my surprise, I started crying. I didn't even know why, but it felt good. It felt freeing. You sat beside me quietly, letting me cry. You didn't say anything. You didn't rush me. You just stayed. After a while, I wiped my face and looked at you. "I'm sorry," I whispered. You shook your head. "Don't be. Sometimes we need to break a little to heal." I smiled weakly. "Thank you," I said softly. You stood up and smiled at me. "Come on, let's keep walking." And so we did. We walked, slowly, side by side. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky with pink, orange, and gold. The soft light made the whole park glow with warmth. You turned to me and said, "You know, I won't always be here." I blinked. "What do you mean?" You smiled gently. "One day I will have to go, but that's okay, because you'll remember this walk. You'll remember the butterfly, the tree, and the ripples in the water. And when you do, you'll remember that you are still growing. You are still making ripples, and that will be enough." I felt my chest tighten. "But I don't want you to go," I whispered. You reached out and touched my hand softly. "You don't need me," you said quietly. "You never did. You just needed to remember yourself." And in that moment, I knew. I knew that you had been a part of me all along, the part that believed in hope, in kindness, in love. You smiled one last time. "You're going to be okay," you whispered. And then, just like that, you were gone. I stood there, alone. But somehow, I didn't feel lonely. I looked at the sky, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled. A real smile. And now, dear listener, if this story touched your heart, remember this. You are still growing, even on the hard days. You are still making ripples, even when you can't see them, and you are never truly alone. If this story made you feel something, please like and subscribe. More stories like this are waiting for you. Stories that will remind you of love, hope, and the beauty of being human. Because no matter how dark it feels, you are still making ripples in the world. Never forget that. Days passed, but your voice never left my mind. I would walk through the same park, hoping to see you again. I would sit by the pond, watching the water, waiting for another stone to create ripples. But you were no longer there. Yet somehow I could still feel you. In the morning breeze that touched my face, in the warmth of the sun on my skin, in the sound of children laughing in the distance. You were everywhere, and you were nowhere. One evening, I returned to the park carrying a small notebook with me. I sat on the same bench where we had first met. The sky was painted with soft orange and pink hues. The world seemed so gentle, so peaceful. I opened the notebook and began to write. Dear you, I wrote. I don't know if I will ever see you again, but I want you to know something. You changed me. You made me look at the sky again. You made me notice the flowers. You made me see beauty where I once saw nothing. You reminded me that I am still growing, and because of you, I believe in hope again. I smiled softly as I stared at the words on the page. The tears that fell weren't from sadness. They were from something else, something softer, something warmer. It was gratitude. I looked up at the sky. The stars were starting to appear one by one, like tiny sparks of light in the growing darkness. I remembered what you said about the stars, about how people we love become stars and watch over us. I closed my eyes and whispered softly, I hope you are watching too. The days continued to pass. My life slowly changed. Not because it became perfect, but because I started noticing the small, beautiful things. I noticed the way the sun painted the sky in gold every evening. I noticed the laughter of strangers walking by. I noticed how a stranger holding the door for someone made me smile. And little by little, I started living again. One morning, as I walked to the park, I saw something that made me stop. A young woman was sitting on the same bench where you and I once sat. She had her face buried in her hands and her shoulders shook softly. She was crying. For a moment, I froze. I could feel her pain, even from a distance. I didn't know her story. I didn't know why she was crying, but somehow I knew exactly how she felt. I walked over slowly and sat beside her. She didn't look at me. She kept her face hidden. I said nothing at first. I simply sat with her, just like you once did for me. After a while, I spoke softly. The flowers are still here, you know. She slowly lifted her head and turned to me with tired, red eyes. What? She asked, confused. I pointed toward the small cluster of wildflowers growing near the pond. The flowers, I repeated with a gentle smile. They are still here. We just forget to look at them sometimes. She blinked and stared at me, unsure of what to say. But then, to my surprise, she turned and looked at the flowers. She stared at them for a long time, as if she were seeing them for the first time. After a moment, she wiped her face with her sleeve. Her eyes were still sad, but there was a softness in them, a tiny, fragile spark of warmth. We sat there in silence, watching the flowers sway gently in the wind. I could feel her pain, but I also saw something else in her eyes, a glimmer of hope. Before leaving, I took a small, smooth stone from the ground and placed it in her hand. "Drop this into the pond," I said softly. She gave me a questioning look. "Why?" I smiled softly, feeling my heart swell with warmth. "Because even the smallest stone creates ripples," I said. "And so do you." I watched as she walked over to the pond and dropped the stone into the water. She stared at the ripples, watching them spread, just as I once did. And in that moment, I realized something. You were still with me. You were in every small act of kindness. You were in every gentle smile I gave to a stranger. You were in every soft word I spoke to someone who was hurting. You were in every ripple I created. And slowly, I understood what you meant. You were never meant to stay forever. You came into my life to remind me of something I had forgotten, to remind me of the power of love, of kindness, and of hope. And now, it was my turn to pass it on. The woman turned back to me. Her eyes were still sad, but there was something softer in them now, a small light, like the first star that appears after the sun sets. She gave me a small, shaky smile. "Thank you," she whispered. I smiled back and said softly, "You're going to be okay." And I knew she would be. Because just like you once did for me, I had now done for her, and she would do it for someone else. And so, my dear listener, if this story touched your heart, let it be a reminder. You may never know how far your kindness reaches. You may never see the ripples it creates. But I promise you, they are there. You are changing the world even on the days you feel small. If this story made you feel something, please like and subscribe. More stories like this are waiting for you. Stories that will remind you that no matter how dark it gets, there will always be light. You are not alone. You are still growing. You are still making ripples, and you are still loved. As the days turned into weeks, something beautiful began to happen. I found myself looking at the world differently. I no longer rushed through my days without noticing the small things. I started to slow down. I started to feel again. I would stop to watch the golden light of the evening sun as it painted the rooftops. I would smile at the sight of children chasing bubbles in the park. I would take long walks with no destination, just to breathe, just to be. And every time I passed the pond, I would pick up a small stone, close my eyes, and drop it into the water. I would watch the ripples dance outward, growing bigger and bigger, reaching further and further. It became a ritual, a promise to myself, a reminder that no act of love, no matter how small, is ever wasted. One day, I was walking through the market, carrying a small bag of fruits. The streets were crowded with people going about their day. Vendors were calling out their prices. Children were tugging at their mothers' hands. The smell of fresh bread and roasted coffee filled the air. As I turned a corner, I saw a little girl sitting on the pavement. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Her clothes were worn, and her tiny hands were covered in dust. She was holding an old, broken toy, a small stuffed bear with one eye missing. I watched her for a moment. People walked past her without noticing. Some glanced at her briefly but kept walking. She sat there quietly, hugging her broken bear, her eyes tired and far too old for someone so small. Without thinking, I walked over and knelt beside her. She looked up at me with wide, uncertain eyes. "Hey," I said softly. "Is your bear tired?" Her small lips parted slightly in surprise. She stared at me for a moment, then slowly shook her head. "No," she whispered. "He's just sad." I gave her a small smile. "Why is he sad?" She lowered her eyes and held the bear closer. "Because nobody loves him anymore," she whispered. My heart ached at her words. I gently reached out and touched the bear's tiny paw. "I love him," I said softly. "He looks very brave. I think he's been through a lot." Her eyes slowly lifted to meet mine. There was a flicker of something. Hope, maybe. A small light in her tired gaze. I reached into my bag and took out an apple. I held it out to her. "Would you like to share this with me?" She stared at the apple for a moment, then slowly reached out and took it. She held it carefully in her tiny hands, as if it were something precious. We sat there on the pavement, sharing the apple. I didn't say much. I simply sat with her, just as you once sat with me. After a while, she looked up at me and asked softly, "Do you have a bear too?" I smiled and shook my head. "No," I said gently, "but I used to. When I was little." She tilted her head slightly. "Was your bear sad too?" I thought about her question for a moment, then shook my head. "No," I said softly. "My bear wasn't sad. But sometimes I was. And when I was sad, my bear made me feel safe, just like your bear makes you feel safe." She stared at me, her little eyes wide and soft. And then, to my surprise, she held out her bear to me. "You can have him," she whispered. I felt a lump in my throat. My chest ached. This tiny child, who had so little, was offering me her most precious possession. I gently shook my head and placed my hand over hers. "No, sweetheart," I said softly. "You keep him. He needs you, and you need him too." Her little lips trembled slightly, and then, slowly, a small, shy smile appeared on her face. I reached into my pocket and took out a small coin. It wasn't much, but I placed it gently into her hand. "For you and your bear," I said softly, "so you can buy him a friend. Maybe he won't be sad anymore." Her eyes widened. She stared at the coin, and then she looked at me. Without saying a word, she suddenly threw her tiny arms around my neck and hugged me. I closed my eyes, holding her gently. In that moment, I didn't want to let go. When she pulled back, she looked at me with her soft brown eyes and whispered, "Thank you." I smiled. "You're going to be okay," I whispered, "just like you once told me." And I knew she would be. As I walked away, I glanced back at her one last time. She was still sitting on the pavement, but she wasn't hugging her bear anymore. She was holding it close, but her arms were looser. She was no longer clinging to it out of fear. She was simply holding it with love. And in that moment, I realized something. We all carry broken bears. We all have pieces of ourselves that feel lost, unloved, and forgotten. But sometimes it just takes one person, a stranger, a friend, or even someone who was only meant to, walk with us for a short time, to remind us that even the broken parts of us are still worthy of love. You were that person for me, and now I was that person for her, and maybe one day she would be that person for someone else. I walked back to the pond that evening. The sun was setting, and the water shimmered with gold and silver light. I knelt by the edge of the pond, picked up a small stone, and held it in my hand for a moment. I closed my eyes and whispered softly, "For you." And then I dropped the stone into the water. The ripples danced outward, growing wider and wider, reaching further and further, just like you said they would. And so, my dear listener, if this story touched your heart, let it be a reminder you carry ripples within you too. Every smile you give, every kind word you speak, and every small act of love creates ripples in the world. You may not always see them, but they are there, reaching further than you can imagine. If this story made you feel something, please like and subscribe. More stories like this are waiting for you. Stories that will remind you that your kindness matters, that your love matters, and that you are never too broken to create beautiful ripples in the world.